My mother skipped every one of my son's birthdays but demanded he give up his graduation trip because my sister suddenly needed free childcare. When he refused, she texted him, "After everything this family has done for you." He sent back one screenshot. An hour later, my sister called me crying, asking where he'd gotten it. My son was sitting at the kitchen table when I got home, laptop shut, hands folded on top of it like he was waiting to be sentenced. That's what scared me first. Not the 4 missed calls from my sister lighting up my phone on the drive over, not the dog barking at nothing by the back door. It was that Eli, who talks with his hands even when he's half asleep, was sitting completely still. He was 17, 6'1", captain of a robotics team that had beaten 62 other schools that spring, and under the kitchen light, he looked about 9 years old. "Mom," he said, "I need you to see something before Aunt Renee calls you." He turned the laptop around. On the screen was our family group chat, 41 people deep, going back 9 years to my cousin's wedding. At the top, time-stamped 6:52 p.m., sat a screenshot inside a screenshot. My mother's words, meant for someone else entirely, dropped into the wrong conversation by a woman who still typed with 2 fingers and had never once, in 9 years, figured out how to delete a message. I read it standing in my own kitchen with my keys still in my hand, the dog finally quiet, the refrigerator humming behind me like nothing in the world had just changed. Then my phone rang. Renee's name on the screen, her photo from Easter with strawberry sauce still on her chin. I didn't answer it yet. I looked at my son instead. I didn't know it then, but by the time I did pick up, the version of my mother I'd spent 36 years quietly managing around would already be gone, replaced by one I'd never let myself actually look at. I'd been driving past my mother's house every Sunday for as long as I could remember, dropping off a casserole dish or picking up a prescription she claimed she couldn't get to the pharmacy for, and somewhere in all that driving, I'd stopped noticing the pattern. Judith Ferris raised 2 daughters alone after our father left when I was 11, and she never let either of us forget it. 31 years at Ridgeview Memorial, most of them running the admissions desk on the 3rd floor, where she developed a particular talent for making other people's crises feel manageable, while her own life stayed, by her own design, entirely unmanageable to anyone but her. She retired in February. By March, she'd started calling me twice a week instead of twice a month, and I told myself that was normal. People get lonely when the thing that organized their whole identity disappears. What I didn't want to look at directly was the birthdays. Eli's, specifically. 9 of them, straight through, missed. Not with drama, never with an actual fight, just a rotating cast of reasons that always sounded plausible in the moment and stopped sounding plausible the second you lined them up end to end. A migraine, a neighbor's emergency, a shift she'd agreed to cover, even the year she wasn't working shifts anymore. She sent a card every year, arriving 4 or 5 days late, $20 folded inside with the same handwriting every time. "Buy something fun. Love, Grandma." My sister Renee got the version of our mother that showed up. Renee had 2 kids under 5, Marisol, 4, and Owen, 2, an ex-husband, Colin, who paid child support the way weather happens, occasionally and without warning, and a mother who'd appear at her door with groceries and no notice, who'd hold the baby for hours and call it nothing, who'd tell anyone who'd listen that she didn't know what Renee would do without her. I used to think Renee had gotten the better end of it. I know now that being needed and being loved aren't the same transaction, and my mother had spent 3 decades getting extremely good at only one of them. My husband Theo noticed it before I did, actually. He's an electrician, methodical about everything, the kind of man who reads instruction manuals for fun, and one night over dishes he said, apropos of nothing, "Your mom's never once asked Eli a single question about robotics. Not one. 3 years. I told him she wasn't a science person. He said that wasn't the point, and he was right, though it took me another 18 months to admit it. I remember the exact shape of the pattern from my own childhood, if I let myself look at it directly, which I mostly didn't. The night before my high school graduation, our downstairs neighbor's kitchen caught fire, a grease pan, nothing that spread past the stove, and my mother spent 6 hours on that woman's porch, making phone calls and coordinating a hotel room and a claims adjuster, while I sat alone at our kitchen table ironing my own gown, because nobody else was home to help me get the wrinkles out. She missed my ceremony the next morning. She wasn't there when they called my name. She showed up an hour later at the reception with a bouquet from the grocery store and a story about how the neighbor had nobody else. And everyone in my family nodded along like that settled it, because it always settled it. I didn't have language for what that was back then. I just knew that the surest way to get my mother's full attention was to be someone else's emergency, never my own. Eli had put down a $2,400 deposit on the Apex Robotics World Invitational back in March, non-refundable under the trip contract's cancellation clause, wired the same week his team clinched the regional title, using money he'd saved from 18 months of closing shifts at a hardware store on Route 9. Half of it was his. The other half Theo and I had covered, proud in a way that made the number feel small. The trip wasn't just a competition. Drayton University sent a liaison to the semi-final round every year to interview standout students for their engineering scholarship program, a renewable $48,000 award that would functionally pay for his entire degree. Eli had already had one phone call with the program that April. He'd spent 4 nights rebuilding a drivetrain controller from scratch because he thought his soldering looked sloppy in the video he'd sent them, and I remember standing in his doorway at 11 at night watching him work, thinking, whatever else goes goes wrong in this family, this kid is going to be fine. That Thursday in May, I came home to find my kitchen exactly the way I'd left it that morning. Coffee mug with the chipped handle still in the sink, grocery list stuck to the fridge under a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, Theo's work boots by the back door, our dog Biscuit's leash draped over the chair where I'd forgotten it, and none of it prepared me for what was already sitting, unread, in 3 different phones. The first call from my mother came 10 days earlier, on a Tuesday, while I was cutting green beans over the sink. I almost didn't pick up because she never called on Tuesdays. "I need to talk to you about Eli's trip," she said. "No hello. What about it?" "Renee's going back to work full-time starting next month. The dental office promoted her. More hours, better insurance, everything she's needed for years. But she doesn't have anyone for Marisol and Owen during the day yet. I told her I could help, but I can't do it alone every day. Not at my age. Not with my knees." "Okay," I said, still not understanding where this was going. "Eli's home that week anyway, isn't he? Before the trip?" It took me a second. "Mom, he's leaving for the trip that week. That's the whole point. It's May 14th through the 19th. "Right. Well, I thought maybe he could push it back or skip it. It's just a school thing, isn't it? He can do robotics next year." I laughed, actually laughed, because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. I told her it wasn't a school field trip. It was a $2,400 non-refundable competition tied to a college scholarship. And she said, in the exact even tone she used to use on hysterical patients at the admissions desk, that family came first, and she was sure he'd understand once someone explained it to him properly. I told her no. I told her Renee needed to find childcare that wasn't a 17-year-old, and I hung up before I said something I'd regret. I told myself that was the end of it. That was rationalization number 1, and it lasted 4 days. I didn't mention it to Eli at all. No reason to worry him over a phone call I assumed had already been forgotten. The second call didn't come to me. It went straight to Eli. He showed it to me afterward, a paragraph, sent as 3 separate texts because my mother has never learned to write in one message. "Your aunt is drowning, and nobody in this family will help her but me. I raised you and your mother without anyone's help. I am asking for 5 days. That is all I have ever asked this family for." Eli's hands were steady when he read it to me, which worried me more than shaking would have. "She's never asked me for anything," he said. "She didn't come to my last 4 birthdays. She's never been to a single competition. And the first thing she asked me for is this." I told him he didn't owe her an explanation, that a polite no was a complete sentence. He sent one anyway. Kind, I thought, kinder than I would have managed, explaining the deposit, the interview, what the scholarship would mean for us. I called my mother that night myself, trying to smooth it over before it went any further, telling her I understood she wanted to help Renee, but that this wasn't the way. She told me I was choosing a robot over my own sister. I hung up a second time. I read Eli's message again before he sent it and felt for a second something like relief. Surely that would be the end of it. That was rationalization number 2. 3 days later, Renee mentioned something in passing that snagged in my brain and wouldn't let go. We were on the phone about something else entirely, a birthday gift for our cousin's daughter, when she said, almost as an aside, that her coworker Dana had already agreed to watch the kids 2 of the 5 days, the days Dana wasn't scheduled at the office herself. "Wait," I said, "you already have someone for 2 of the days?" "Yeah, Dana's great with them. I just need someone for Monday, Wednesday, and Friday." I sat with that for a full minute after we hung up. If Renee already had a plan for 40% of the week, this wasn't the 5-alarm emergency my mother had described. It was a scheduling gap, an inconvenient one, a real one, but not the kind of crisis that justified asking a teenager to torch a scholarship interview over it. I called my mother a 3rd time, trying to raise it gently, asking whether she knew Renee already had Monday and Friday covered. She talked over me, said I didn't understand how exhausting 3 straight days with 2 toddlers would be for anyone, let alone a woman working full-time, and that I'd understand if I ever had to do it myself. I let it go. My stomach did something small and uncomfortable, a first flicker of a thought I wasn't ready to finish yet, that this had never really been about Renee's schedule at all. I told myself I was overthinking it. Rationalization number 3. I drove to her house that Friday anyway, unannounced, because a small stubborn part of me wanted to see her face when I asked the question directly instead of over the phone, where she could hang up or change the subject or claim the call had dropped. She was in the kitchen when I let myself in, still wearing the cardigan she'd worn to work for the last decade of her career, even though there was no work left to wear it to, a pot of coffee going cold on the counter beside a stack of unopened retirement paperwork she hadn't touched in 3 months. "I know about Dana," I said, before she could offer me anything to drink. "Renee only needs help 3 days, not 5. So what is this actually about?" "It's about being there for my family," she said, not looking up from the paperwork, straightening it into a pile that didn't need straightening. "Something you wouldn't understand, since apparently a robot is more important to this family than a 2-year-old. That's not what I said, and you know it. I know that everyone in this family only calls me when they need something and complains the rest of the time about how I do it." Her hands were moving the whole time she said it, wiping a counter that was already clean, the same restless motion I remembered from the admissions desk, from every kitchen of my childhood. Like stillness itself was the thing she couldn't survive. "I don't know what you want from me, Naomi. I'm trying to help." I told her that Eli's answer wasn't going to change, that I'd come to ask her, one more time, to let it go before it turned into something none of us could take back. She said she'd think about it. She didn't say yes. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel the whole way, replaying the conversation and finding each time a version of myself that had said wanted something braver, something that actually landed, a version that didn't exist, because in the moment, standing in that kitchen, I'd done what I always did with my mother. I'd left the door open a crack, hoping she'd walk through it on her own instead of closing it and making her deal with the sound. The fourth thing happened on a Sunday night, and it wasn't evidence I went looking for. It was an accident, the kind my mother had been making her entire life without ever once getting caught by it. Eli found it first. He has a folder for old assignments buried somewhere in that group chat's shared photos tab, and while he was hunting for a robotics permission slip our school had lost twice, he scrolled past a message that didn't belong. My mother, meaning to send it to her old church friend Carol, had instead pasted it into the family chat by mistake. The wrong thread, same first three letters in two different contact names, an error anyone could make, and only my mother would have left standing, unedited, for 6 hours before anyone noticed. Carol, I know it sounds bad, but I need this. Renee doesn't need me the way she used to, and neither does Naomi. Ever since I retired, I don't do anything for anybody. If I can get Eli to give up this trip, I'm the one who fixed it. I'm the one everyone thanks. I'm still needed for something. I don't know who I am if nobody needs me to fix anything anymore. Eli read it to me over the phone, his voice flat in a way that told me he was working very hard to keep it that way. She doesn't care if I go to Houston, he said. She cares if she gets to be the reason I don't. I didn't have anything to say to that, because he was right, and because some part of me had known it for 36 years and never let myself say the sentence out loud. My hands were shaking by the time I set the phone down on the counter, and I stood there a long moment before I trusted myself to pick it back up. He forwarded it, not to me privately, not to a smaller thread where it might have quietly died, to the full family chat, 41 people, the same thread my mother had accidentally dropped it into in the first place, with one line of his own underneath it. I think this got sent to the wrong person. I want to say I told him not to. I didn't. By the time I saw it, it was already sitting there, already read by 11 people, already the kind of thing you cannot pull back out of the air once it's been said in front of a room. 51 minutes later, my phone rang. Renee, sobbing hard enough that I couldn't understand the first 3 sentences. Where did he get that? She kept saying. Naomi, where did he get that? Neandres Whitfield had been Eli's robotics advisor for 3 years, and he was the one who talked me down that first night, though I hadn't called him for that. I'd called to ask, stupidly, panicked, whether there was any version of the trip that could still be salvaged if my mother somehow talked Eli into staying home out of guilt. There isn't a version where he doesn't go, he told me, gently but without softening it. 14 years I've been doing this, and I've never once seen a school recoup a deposit like this. Read the contract, it's right there in section 4. Cancellation inside 60 days forfeits the full amount. No exceptions for family emergencies unless it's the student's own medical documentation. Drayton's interview slot isn't reschedulable either. It's the semi-final round or nothing. If he's not standing in that arena Wednesday afternoon, the interview doesn't happen this cycle. Not next month, not next year for this program. He also told me, almost as an afterthought, that Eli was one of 2 students on the whole team who'd been asked to run the drivetrain diagnostics live in front of the judges. Not something you could hand off to another kid on 5 days' notice, even if you wanted to. I asked him, half joking, half not, whether he thought I was a bad mother for letting it get this far without saying anything sooner. I think, he said, you're the only adult in this so far who's tried to protect a kid instead of a feeling. Dr. Priya Anand called 2 days later. She'd been copied on the school's general trip correspondence and had somehow, through the school's activities director, Ms. Odalis Ferreira, heard enough of what was happening to reach out directly, which I later learned was not typical of her. 12 years running Drayton's engineering liaison program. I don't usually do this, she told me on the phone, but I read your son's application essay. He wrote about learning to solder from a stranger on a YouTube channel because nobody in his life did anything mechanical. I'd hate for something outside his control to be the reason we don't get to finish that conversation. Ms. Ferreira, for her part, emailed me the trip's insurance policy directly. 9 years overseeing these logistics, she said, and she'd never had a parent ask for the fine print mid-crisis before, but she pulled it anyway, highlighted the line confirming there was no family hardship exception written into it at all. Theo didn't call anyone with a credential behind their name. He just went out to the garage that Sunday night, where Eli had retreated to tighten bolts on a subsystem that didn't need tightening, and sat on the workbench stool across from him without saying much of anything for a while. Eli told me about it later, in pieces, the way 17-year-olds tell you things, sideways, over breakfast like it wasn't important. Theo had asked him one question, whether he was more angry at his grandmother or more afraid that he'd made things worse by forwarding the message, instead of just letting it go quietly. Eli said he didn't know. Theo told him that not knowing was allowed, that plenty of the right choices in life feel exactly like the wrong ones while you're making them, and that the test wasn't whether it felt clean, it was whether he could still look at himself in a year. Eli said that was the first time all week he'd stopped feeling like the villain of somebody else's story. The third person I called for myself. Grace Linden had been a family therapist for 18 years, and I'd seen her twice before years ago after my father left, long enough ago that I'd half forgotten her office still had the same watercolor of a lighthouse over the couch. I told her the whole thing in one long, unbroken sentence and then sat there breathing while she let the silence do its work. Your mother built her entire identity around being the one who fixes things, Grace said finally. That's not a character flaw invented last week. That's 31 years of a career and a marriage marriage that both told her the same thing, that she only mattered when someone needed rescuing. Retirement didn't create this. It took away the only stage she had left to perform it on. That doesn't make it okay, I said. No, Grace agreed. It makes it explainable. Those aren't the same thing, and you're allowed to hold both. I asked her what I was supposed to do with that, practically, in the next 5 days, and she told me something I kept coming back to for the rest of the week. That clarity wasn't cruelty, and that the kindest thing I could do for my mother in the long run was stop absorbing the consequences of choices that weren't mine to fix. You've spent 36 years being the translator, Grace said, near the end of the session, explaining your mother to your sister, explaining your sister to your mother, smoothing every edge before anyone else could feel it. That's not a small thing to give up. It's going to feel, for a while, like you're the one being cruel, because you're the one who stops catching things before they hit the floor. She asked me what I was afraid would happen if I let something hit the floor for once. I sat with that question longer than I wanted to admit, and the honest answer, when it finally came, surprised me. I wasn't afraid of my mother's reaction anymore. I was afraid of what it would mean about the last 36 years if it turned out I hadn't needed to manage her at all. The confrontation happened in the group chat itself, in real time, starting at 9:14 that Sunday night, and I have never in my life watched anything move that fast. Mom, what is this? Renee wrote first. What does this mean? If I can get Eli to give up this trip. 3 dots appeared under my mother's name and disappeared. Appeared again. That was private. That was sent to the wrong person. That's not an answer, Renee wrote. Dana already told me she'd cover 2 of the days over a week ago. I told you that. I told you Wednesday I only needed someone for 3 days, not 5. Why did you tell Eli it was an emergency for the whole week? More dots. Nothing for almost a full minute, long enough that I pictured my mother sitting alone at her kitchen table, the one with the yellow tablecloth she'd had since before I was born, typing and deleting the same sentence over and over. I was trying to help. I don't understand why everyone is attacking me for trying to help my own family. My cousin Denise, who almost never posted in that chat, wrote, Aunt Judith, you missed my daughter's christening because you said you were helping a neighbor. You missed Eli's birthday 4 years running. You told my mother last Christmas you were too tired to be needed by everyone. I think we all thought that was just how you talked. Reading this, I don't think it was. My Uncle Walt wrote 3 words. This is sad. Someone else, my mother's own younger sister, Aunt Peg, who almost never weighed in on anything, wrote that she remembered Judith saying something nearly identical the year she retired from the church volunteer rotation, that she didn't know what to do with her hands if nobody needed her hands for something. Nobody had thought much of it at the time. Reading it back now, in this light, it landed differently for everyone at once, my phone buzzing every few seconds as more people typed. My mother tried once to redirect it. I don't think this is the place for this conversation, she wrote, and Denise wrote back almost instantly, you made it the place when you sent a private message to the wrong chat, Aunt Judith. You don't get to pick the venue after the fact. Someone, I still don't know who, the messages were coming too fast to track by then, posted a screenshot of their own, an old birthday thread from 6 years earlier. My mother writing, so sorry, something came up, next year for sure, under a photo of Eli blowing out candles without her. Someone else replied with a string of question marks. My cousin's husband, who'd married into the family 2 years ago and had clearly never seen any of this before, wrote simply, is this normal for you guys? And nobody answered him, which was its own kind of answer. Even Colin weighed in, which surprised everyone since Renee's ex-husband hadn't posted in that chat in over a year and generally treated it like a group he'd forgotten to leave. For what it's worth, he wrote, Judith used to tell me Renee couldn't handle things on her own back when we were still married. I believed her. I think that's part of why I stopped trying to help. Renee didn't respond to that one directly, but I saw her set her phone face down on the table when it came through, both hands pressed flat against the wood for a second like she needed something solid to hold on to. I sat at my own kitchen table watching the thread scroll past faster than I could read it, my stomach in a knot the whole time, half of me wanting to close the laptop and half of me unable to look away from 30 years of quiet family math finally being done out loud, in public, by people who'd never had all the numbers before. And then Renee wrote the thing that actually broke it open, the sentence that made the whole chat go quiet for 4 full minutes. I never asked you to do this. I told you I had it handled. You told me it was fine, that you wanted to help, that it would be good for you. You made this about you needing to be needed, and then you made Eli the one who had to say no to you so it would look like he was the bad guy instead of you. My mother's response when it finally came was 6 words long. After everything this family has done for you, the exact line she'd texted Eli. The one she reached for apparently every single time. The one phrase that had worked on both of us for 36 years, deployed now against her own daughter in front of 41 witnesses, because she genuinely did not have another sentence in her when the fixing stopped working. Nobody answered it for almost a minute. I watched the little scene check marks pile up under it, one after another, family members reading it in real time and choosing not to respond, which was somehow louder than if they had. Then Denise wrote, what exactly has this family done for you, Aunt Judith? Genuinely asking, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the other way around, and it has for a long time. My mother left the chat 40 minutes later. No goodbye message, no explanation. The little notification just appeared. Judith Ferris left the conversation, same as she'd left every birthday, every holiday she'd talked herself out of for a decade, except this time 39 other people watched her do it in text, time-stamped, unable to pretend afterward that it hadn't hadn't happened exactly the way it happened. I should have felt victorious. I mostly felt sick, my stomach in the same knot it had been in since I read that first screenshot, standing in my kitchen with my keys still in my hand. I did not expect what happened the next morning, which was Renee showing up at my door at 7:40 with both kids still in pajamas, mascara from the night before smudged under her eyes, asking if she could come in. "I need to tell you something," she said, sitting at my kitchen table in the same chair Eli had been sitting in 3 days earlier. "This isn't the first time she's done this to me. The trip with Marisol's father 2 years ago. She told me she'd watch the baby so I could finally get away for a weekend, and then she called every 4 hours until I came home early, telling me Marisol had a fever she never actually had. I found that out from the pediatrician's office 6 months later. I never told you because I didn't want to believe it either. I asked her why she thought our mother did it." "Because if I'm not falling apart," Renee said quietly, "she doesn't have a reason to show up. And if she doesn't have a reason to show up, I think she's scared none of us would notice she was gone." "There was another time too," Renee said, quieter now, Owen climbing into her lap and reaching for a piece of toast off my plate right after the divorce. "She told everyone at church I was struggling so badly I couldn't manage the kids alone, told the pastor, told half the prayer group, when I hadn't asked her for anything and I was doing fine. People started showing up with casseroles I didn't need, asking if I was okay in that voice. You know the voice. I found out later she'd told them I was, quote, barely holding it together. I was furious, but I never said anything, because what was I supposed to say? Thank you for the concern, but you invented my crisis." I asked her gently why she'd never told me any of this before. "Because you'd have believed me," Renee said, and her voice cracked on it in a way that undid something in my chest. And I think some part of me needed to keep believing it wasn't really about her needing to be needed, because if it was, then every time she showed up for me, it wasn't really for me, and I didn't want that to be true. We sat with that for a long time. It didn't make what had happened to Eli okay. It made it something larger and older than either of us had let ourselves see. Not a single bad decision about a robotics trip, but the shape of an entire life, finally visible all at once because one accidental screenshot had done what 30 years of birthdays quietly missed had never managed to do. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't quite. 2 days later, the Tuesday before Eli was supposed to fly out, my mother showed up at our house unannounced, standing on the front step in the same beige cardigan she'd worn to every Thanksgiving I could remember, holding a wrapped box she said was just something small for the trip. Eli was upstairs packing. I stood in the doorway and didn't move aside. "I want to see him before he leaves," she said. "I have a right to say goodbye to my own grandson." "You have a right to ask him," I said, "not to show up and put me in the position of deciding for him." She looked past me into the house, the way she used to look past patients at the admissions desk when she was already 3 steps ahead of whatever they were about to tell her. "I raised you better than this, Naomi," turning me away at my own daughter's door. "You didn't raise me to let people guilt teenagers out of scholarships," I said, and I heard my own voice shake on the last word, and I let it shake instead of swallowing it the way I always had. "I'll ask him if he wants to come down. That's what I can offer you." Eli came down on his own, actually. He'd heard the voices from the top of the stairs and stood 2 steps up, one hand on the railing, and told her, evenly, that he appreciated the gift, but that he needed a few weeks before he was ready to talk about anything else. She left the box on the porch table. She didn't argue. For the first time in longer than I could remember, she just left, quietly, without a scene, and I didn't know whether that was progress or exhaustion, and I decided it didn't matter which. Either way, it was the first time in years she'd taken no for an answer without making someone pay for it afterward. I thought a lot in those last few days before the trip about what Grace had said, that I'd spent 36 years being the translator, catching things before they hit the floor. Watching my mother leave that chat without a word, watching her stand on my porch and take a no for the first time I could remember, I understood for the first time that I hadn't actually been protecting her all those years. I'd been protecting the story I needed to tell myself about her, the one where she was tired and overworked and doing her best, because the alternative that she'd chosen this, over and over for 3 decades, was harder to carry than the lie had ever been. My mother called me the night before Eli's flight, 11 days after the screenshot. I almost didn't answer. I did, because Grace had told me weeks earlier that avoiding her forever would just be a quieter version of the same performance, and I didn't want to build my own life around managing around my mother the way I'd spent 36 years doing. She didn't apologize. Not really. Not the way I would have written it if I'd been telling this story to make her look better than she was. What she said was that she didn't know what she was supposed to do with herself anymore, now that nobody needed fixing, and that she hadn't meant for it to come out like it had. "You didn't mean for it to come out at all," I said. "That's different from not meaning it." She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, in a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from her, whether Eli would still want her at his graduation in June. I told her that was a question for him, not me, and that if she genuinely wanted an answer, showing up consistently, without needing to be the one who fixed anything, might be a place to start. She didn't say anything else. I let the silence sit there instead of filling it for her, which was new and harder than I expected, and I didn't hate how it felt. Eli's flight left at 6:05 the next morning. I drove him to the airport with the trunk full of a robot case bigger than our dog, and somewhere around the 3rd exit he said, apropos of nothing, "I'm not mad at her anymore. I just don't think I need her to be proud of me the way I used to." I told him that sounded like the healthiest thing anyone in our family had said in about a decade. He laughed, actually laughed, laughed, the sound filling up the whole car, and 3 days later, he called me from the semi-final floor in Houston, his voice cracking with the kind of exhaustion that only comes from something that mattered. Drayton had offered him the interview slot that afternoon, and Dr. Anand had told him personally, before he'd even changed out of his team polo, that his essay was the reason she'd made the call in the first place. His team placed 4th overall out of 62 schools, and he texted me a photo of the trophy sitting crooked in his lap on the flight home. The caption, just 3 words, worth the fight. Graduation was the second Saturday in June, hot enough that the folding chairs on the football field had gone slightly soft in the sun by the time the ceremony started. My mother came. She sat in the 4th row next to Aunt Peg instead of trying to claim a seat up front, and she didn't bring a gift wrapped in guilt or a story about what the day had cost her. When Eli's name was called, she stood up and clapped like everyone else. No louder, no longer. And afterward, she waited her turn behind Renee's kids to hug him, and she said, "I'm proud of you." 4 words, nothing else stapled to the end of them. "After everything this family's been through," Eli said to her, quiet enough that only I was close enough to hear it. "I think I actually got here because of it, not in spite of it." She didn't have an answer for that. For once, she didn't try to find one. She just nodded and let the sentence be the end of the conversation instead of the beginning of another 5-day negotiation. We didn't fix everything that summer, and I've stopped expecting we will. My mother started volunteering 2 mornings a week at a literacy program downtown, something Grace had suggested months earlier, and my mother had waved off every time until she ran out of other places to put her hands. She still calls more than she used to. Sometimes I still hear the old rhythm underneath her voice, the reach for a crisis to solve, and I've learned to name it out loud instead of quietly absorbing it. "I don't need you to fix anything right now, Mom. I just called to talk." And some days that lands, and some days it doesn't, and I've made peace with both. Renee started seeing Grace too, on her own, and the two of us talk now in a way we didn't before, without our mother sitting invisibly between every sentence, deciding which version of the truth was allowed to survive contact with the rest of the family. Eli left for Drayton at the end of August with the scholarship in hand and the same robot case, dented now along one corner from Houston, riding in the trunk one last time on the drive to campus. Somewhere behind us, in the rearview mirror, our whole ordinary life kept doing what it always did. The dog barking at a stranger's balloon, the grocery list curling at the corner under its lighthouse magnet, the coffee going cold in a chipped mug nobody had washed yet, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, none of it needed anyone to come along and fix it. It just needed to be left alone long enough to be what it actually was.